I remember. It was after the French and Indian War. It was late October 1770. George Washington and I were on a surveying expedition to the Craik in the Ohio Valley. Now, we were surveying bounty lands awarded us for our gallant service during the French and Indian War. Now, the Craik is a very, very remote area. Old Indian paths are the only access. One day, we were resting in camp, and a party of Indians led by a trader come upon us. Well, the war was long since over, so we were certain that this meeting would be a peaceful one. We learned from our interpreter, Joseph Nicholson, that traveling with that trader was a chief from one of the northwestern tribes and some of his warriors. As a matter of fact, that chief commanded the Indians in a battle against George during the war. And even though it had been over 16 years, that chief still recognized George. Well, we did our best to make them feel welcome. And when George offered his hand to the chief drew his hand back. So, George tried the delight of the savages, ardent spirits. George took a glass of whiskey. He took a sip, and he offered it to the chief. And the chief refused to drink. So, George tried tobacco. Now, smoking tobacco is a symbol of peace to the Indians. However, George, George Washington abhorred smoking. Oh, he hated it. But still, George took a single puff, and he offered the pipe to the chief. And the chief would not smoke. Well, about this time, our banquet was ready. So George seated the chief right beside him. And then he did that chief such great honors as to serve him himself, and plentifully. And then that chief, well, he wouldn't eat. Well, anxiety was pretty high around the old campfire about then, I tell ya. Until the chief sat up and spoke. I am the chief of many tribes. My influence extends from the waters of the Great Lakes to the far blue mountains. I have traveled a long and weary path to meet the great warrior of that battle. It was on a day when the white man's blood mixed with the streams of our forest that I first beheld this young chief. I said to my men, "Mark yon tall and daring warrior. He is not of the Redcoat tribe. He has an Indian's wisdom, and his men fight as we do. Look, he alone is exposed. Quick, make certain your aim, and he dies." Our rifles were leveled, rifles which, but for him, knew not how to miss. But our efforts were in vain, for a power far mightier than we shields him from harm. He cannot die in battle. Listen, the Great Spirit protects and guides his destiny. He shall be the chief of many nations, and a people yet unborn will consider him the father of a mighty empire. Now, I've told that story hundreds of times. I've told it all throughout the Revolutionary War. It got to the point where the other soldiers started to think, oh, that's just Dr. Craik. You know, George Washington's friend, the old storyteller. Well, that is, until the Battle of Monmouth. You see, George Washington was never the type of commander to just sit back behind the lines and issue his orders forward. No. George Washington was the type of commander that if an order needed to be given, he would give the order to the man it was intended for himself, no matter what the situation. So, on the first day of the Battle of Monmouth, George Washington rode out to the front of the battle to issue an order to one of his commanders, Commander Hartley. And as George Washington sat there astride his horse, there in the thick of the battle, issuing that order to Commander Hartley, the enemy fired a cannon shot. And that cannonball hit right at the hooves of George Washington's horse. It blew dirt, debris, sticks, stones, rocks all over George, his horse, Commander Hartley and his horse. Commander Hartley's horse reared up and tried to get away. Commander Hartley fell pale, as if he'd seen death itself. But George Washington did not stutter, did not stammer, did not start, did not jump. He acted as if nothing had happened at all. And when he finished issuing that order to Commander Hartley, he calmly turned and rode away. I looked to the other soldiers, who were now looking at me, the old storyteller. What could I say? Nothing really, so I just smiled and pointed to the heavens. And those soldiers knew that the Indian prophecy was true. George Washington could not be killed in battle.